Hi, James. How are you?
Oh, hey, there you are. I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great. I'm doing great. Thank you so much for dialing in.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we just heard a little bit about your background, James. Is there anything else that our listeners should know about you?
Um, well, like what brought me to PBL or just me in general?
Just you in general, something that folks may not know just by listening to your bio.
Oh, well, I have some things that you wouldn't know about me by not knowing my file. I I've worked on with a lot of different youth agencies over the years. So everything from the Boy Scouts to the YMCA, and I've done it all over the U.S., which has kind of helped me know a little bit more, like learn a little bit more about just education across the country because I've gotten to interact with students in a whole different uh, myriad of settings and heard what they thought about their classes and their teachers and what they're learning and things like that. And so it kind of, that I think has helped me, really kind of helped expose me to a lot of different ideas kind of inadvertently by talking to students one on
Something that,
one. I'm sorry?
okay.
Yeah.
All right. Um, she had to you from
Well, what brought me to project-based learning was really kind of three different things that I kind of jokingly talked about it as as like a play in three acts kind of, because I had kind of a I had kind of a long roundabout way into education, and it really kind of actually started when I was 12 years old, because that was when I got my first job as a counselor at summer camp working for the Boy Scouts. And yes, I'm an Eagle Scout. By all means, have fun with it if you'd like, because it is kind of goofy and silly. But one thing that experience and the years that I spent working for these different at these different camps, because I think I spent almost probably a good 16, 17 years working in summer programs, was that that the model of instruction that they kind of pushed. And so by the time I was leaving summer programs and moving into the classroom, I had to develop this different way of teaching, because the first thing that they told you when they walked in is that the campers that are coming here, they're not students. They kind of
Right.
hammered that into our heads. They said they spent all year at school. They don't want you to come and do what their teachers are going to do, but you have certain things that you have to teach them how to do. And so they always said, you're not teaching students in classes, you're facilitating with your peers a learning experience. And that's
Wow.
really kind of how, yeah, it was a way of thinking about it that by the time I got into the classroom, I was doing all of these things, like emphasizing hands-on learning and participatory activities, and had this inquiry-driven method of instruction that I didn't really have words for, because it's just what I'd always done and what I had to do when I was working with at these summer programs. So that was kind of the first part of
Mm-hmm.
my journey into PBL. The second part was when I got into the classroom. I've started working at a small district in Northern California, just across the Golden Gate Bridge from San Francisco, and I was working there, um, and doing the things that I had always done. Like I had these habits that were like camp instruction habits that I had, and I didn't know what they were. Like I didn't have words for them um, until about my fourth or fifth year. Our district decided to bring Buck Institute in for a workshop. And then suddenly, for the first time, I had this vocabulary and this formalized method to take the little pieces that I had been playing with during my younger years and put them into practice in a much more effective way. And it's something that I know that you probably are aware of, that a lot of times teachers are doing all of the things that we want them to in PBL, but
Right.
they may not be thinking about them the right way, or they may not have them in the best order to make them the most effective practices. And that's kind of what
Exactly.
this experience did for me.
Right. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah, it was really great. And the last thing I just want to touch on briefly, because it kind of connects to some of the work that I'm really interested in right now, is that outside of my formal classroom teaching, being that I was still kind of a big outdoor nerd from all my years when my parents shipped me off to summer camp, I still and I still do. I began doing interpretive work at for a couple of different groups. Like I worked for San Diego County Parks and Rec for a while. I worked for the California State Park System at Angel Island in the middle of the San Francisco Bay as a volunteer interpreter, and then most recently for the National Park Service. And
Okay.
and through that work, I got trained in formalized interpretation, which I'm just starting to kind of make, and am trying to formalize the connections between the inquiry-based processes that drive PBL in the classroom and the interpretive model that essentially all park rangers and museum guides and everybody uses when the public comes in. And so it's like, you're weaving this narrative, you're trying to create the sense of empathy between the visitor and the subject you're talking about. You're trying to create this kind of truthful air about the facts that are associated with whatever it is you're talking about. And so it really is a lot about connecting the visitor, much like we're trying to connect the student to the learning, the subject of the learning.
Wow.
And it's a really, it's a very interesting process in which there are a lot of different parallels about that I'm really interested in exploring more, and I'm doing so with my current work. So that's kind
Yeah,
of how I got where I
that's
am.
really interesting. Yeah, that's super interesting. And I would never tease you about being a scout because I was a Girl Scout as well. I just
There you
wanted to
go.
throw that out there. But I mean, just your scout experience and your experience with the National Park Service,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I think that was really interesting when you were mentioning the concept of facilitating with peers,
Mm-hmm.
as sort of the model for the scouts, and then thinking about in the National Park Service, thinking about how to create this connection between visitors and how that translates also into what the work we do with PBL, connecting students. And I mean, are there other connections that you found between like scouts and parks and PBL?
Yeah, one of the big ones is, and this is something that I know you're familiar with, is the importance of it not being student centered, it not being teacher centered, but student centered. That you need
Right.
to kind of get out of this idea of you yourself as the teacher are the sage on the stage, and the most effective means of instruction is going to be for the students to sit there and get that, sit and get. That model, for a lot of different reasons, is not best for a multitude of things, but it's definitely not the best thing if you really want to have deep long-term learning or student engagement through this process and kind of pair with them on it. And so um,
Right.
and that kind of brings us to inquiry being the center of this, where the students are the ones who are coming up with the questions, trying to figure out what it is they need to know in order to complete a task or a challenge associated with a project. And then you,
Mhm.
as the teacher, are sometimes facilitating through certain things, or helping them to just, helping them kind of uncover what it is they need to know. There might be some instruction when you're helping them skill build, but it really is a partnership more than it is like a led by instructor activity. And it's very
Right.
similar with interpretation, because in a way it's a little bit more challenging, because you only have these people's attention for when they come in. They come to your park, or they come to the monument, or wherever it is, whatever it is, the site that you're interpreting for them, and they expect to get, you need to give them this information. You need to connect with them quickly. And so you have to
Yeah.
figure out very quickly, you know, who they are, what their interests are, why they're there, so that you
Mm.
can use that in the process. And so it's the idea of first trying to get them to engage with and appreciate the subject of whatever it is that you're interpreting. So it might be, you know, asking them what they already know, framing the subject around the purpose of their visit, but then also after that, trying to create a sense of empathy with them, because you want them to experience, or you want them to experience it through a different point of view. And so you're kind of leading them through either what had happened there, or the importance of the area, or what daily life was like at this place, so that they come away with a different type of understanding the did. And you've got to, and just like in teaching, you have to have your formative checks. And so it's got to be a very interactive process, very, it can't be something that there very few groups, especially families, are going to want to sit there and listen to you jaw on for an hour nonstop. So you have to break up the instructional bits with things for them, or give them, realia or things to interact with in some way. And then finally, before they leave, hopefully get some sort of way for them, have them kind of, find a way to make it a little bit more authentic, or to have them come back so that they not just take something away from it, but also support the work of the park, or the mission of the place where you are. And so it's a process it's very, very similar in a lot of ways to the ways that we try to engage our students, and to get them to care about what they're learning, or help them realize why they should care about what they're learning, even if they don't know.
Wow, that is so cool. And just as you were talking, I think I came up with at least 3 projects in my brain on local parks near me.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're a great and an underutilized, in my opinion, resource for teachers, because something like 95% of the US population lives within a 45-minute drive of a national park or monument. And it's even shorter if you take into account state parks or county parks. And a lot of them have educational resources that they freely give, or programs that even if you can't get your students there, they can come in. Maybe they can Skype in, or maybe they can bring somebody out, or a lot of parks have what are called crate programs, where they bring things like objects and different things associated with the park to your students, because they know, number one, part of their mission is, of course, education, but on top of that, that if the students get excited enough, they're going to want their families to take them out there, or they're going to want to follow up, and then the park is starting to get visitors, and it benefits them as well. So I've really been happily surprised a lot of times when I've reached out to different historic sites and just asked them for support in projects I've done, the lengths they're willing to go to. There really is power in just asking.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, James, now that you've told us a little bit about your PBL story, tell us about your PBL superpower.
Okay, so I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I actually brought my wife in as well, because she's an educator. I said, I know I'm going to be asked this question. I didn't know what my superpower is. And she said, well, you're a very mollifying presence. And I was trying to figure out, like, is that a good thing or not? So I had to look it up, and I'm not embarrassed to say that. But once I looked it up, I knew exactly what she was talking about, because one of, I was a classroom teacher, and have kind of taken that part of my educational persona right now has kind of taken a back seat to the part which is supporting teachers to support their students. And I really like coming into a situation where a teacher is either new to project-based learning, or it's their first attempt, or a student is new to project-based learning, it's their first time through a project, and they get into the situation where it's like, this isn't going to work, this is too hard, I just don't get it, just why can't you just give me a test, or why can't I just give my students a PowerPoint presentation and be done with it? And really helping them kind of stop and get that, get those real concerns out, but then helping them move past those obstacles, or figure out ways to overcome them, so that they can have a successful PBL experience, and really understand the power of that kind of educational model, and really see that for the teachers, it's going to give them, a new way to engage their students, and a better way for a lot of them, a lot of their students. And for the students themselves, they're going to see a lot of growth in areas other than just the subject, and they're going to find hopefully a newfound appreciation for something that they might thought of as boring or kind of meaningless through this authentic
Yeah.
focus that we have in PBL.
Okay. So you are kind of the invisible hand helping the teacher kind of bring their project back from the fray.
There you
So
go.
tell us about a breakthrough PBL moment. And this, can be related to a class of your own or
Mhm.
a class or that another teacher had that you kind of helped them in that moment.
Yeah, one that comes to mind almost immediately was during one of my last years as a full-time teacher before I moved into what I'm doing now, which is part-time support, but in the classroom. And
Mm-hmm.
I had this, and this is going to sound familiar to, I'm sure, a lot of people listening to this, but I had this group of students who, anytime we did a group project, they just did everything they could do nothing, so they would and it wasn't because they weren't smart. In fact, they were probably some of the smartest kids I'd ever had, but they knew how to get the rest of the group to do it for them so that they could more or less just kind of skate through. And so after seeing this pattern repeat itself once or twice, and there's this one student in particular who I just looked at him and I saw the way his peers looked at him, and I knew that he was like a natural leader, and I really wanted him to have a chance to have that kind of to bring that aspect of himself out into the classroom so that he could, see that it's not just something that he has to not just something that he does like with his friends in his off time, but something that could actually benefit him academically and really
Mm-hmm.
help him kind of engage the class more. And so what I did was I stuck him and all of these, kids that were trying to skate by all together in one group. And on the first day that we put him in their groups, he looked around and he realized exactly what I had done. And he came up to me and he said, like, I can't be in this group. None of these people do anything. And I looked at him and I said, well, now's your big chance to be the one that whips them into shape. And I didn't let him move. And it was not always easy for him, but he realized very quickly that if he wasn't the one to step forward, because none of the rest of them were going to, he whipped this group of kids into shape. And he was
Wow.
stressed sometimes and he was frustrated. So I don't want to make it sound like it was a perfect thing the entire time. There were days when he just wanted to like quit and walk away. But we had a lot of one-on-one talks and a lot of debriefing and reflecting. And even on the days when he just was like, I just want to be done, just give me my individual work and I'm going to go work by myself, I'd say, well, just try this and do it one more day. And we had a couple of one more days, and we finally got to the end of the project and he was able to pull this group through. And it was the first time he had said in his reflection at the end, because I always make my groups do individual reflections at the end of every project. And he said it was the first time that he had ever been a leader in a group project in his life.
Wow.
And that he didn't know if he liked it or not, which I really think actually says a lot about leadership, because sometimes it's really not a lot of fun,
Right.
But the fact that he had never felt like he had never done that before, and he was able to do it just even that once, was really, really great. And that felt like a really great, successful moment to me.
And that's awesome. That's definitely going to encourage a lot of teachers that are listening to this when they have that group that just wants to skate by.
Yeah.
So that'll definitely give some insight for a lot of folks. So what has been your most challenging PBL moment?
The most challenging thing I think for me is knowing that sometimes the best thing for a student is to fail and fail early.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there, we talk a lot about this. It's kind of one of those conversations going around the ed world right now where they're talking about allowing students to fail, or the importance of failure, and how, failure is a natural mechanism in the learning process where, you can't figure out the right way to do something until you figure out the wrong way to do it several times, kind of thing. And I think it's hard because it's hard for me, especially when I see groups kind of going off on a tangent that I know is eventually going to lead them back to, on their own, the right answer, but
Mm-hmm.
not blurting the answer out, or not coming over and fixing a problem that I see right away, or not, you know, um, trying to be the one that always has all the answers and is trying to save them from themselves, especially when things like time are of the essence, because, oh my Lord, there's never enough time in education. And so, you know, you always want to kind of move things along, but, you know, whether they're students or whether they're, you know, visitors to a park, facilitating their connection to the answer or the solution is really what we should be doing, not so much telling them what they should think or what they should do, but letting them figure it out for themselves. You know, it's that whole like teach a man to fish adage where like,
Right.
you know, I could go over and just catch the fish for you, but if I sit here and watch you get frustrated and cast the line 20 times, eventually you're going to teach yourself how to do it, and you know what's going to be in the long run more beneficial. We all know that, but it's not always really easy to do. On a side note, I've also tried to teach kids how to fish at summer camp, and it is very frustrating. But you know, it's something
Yes.
that they feel much more rewarded. You know, they feel a lot more rewarded when they do it themselves than when someone does it for them. And so, like in the end, how can you argue with that?
You can't.
No, you can't.
You really can't. What tips do you have for PBL practitioners, specifically related to your area of focus?
Oh, that's a great question. So if one of the things that I would definitely say about just kind of with me trying to connect the stuff that goes on at parks and historic sites with project-based learning is if you're really interested in finding a blueprint for inquiry, like if you're completely confused about like what the heck is this or how do I do it, what is this inquiry thing, is it just making a list of questions, I'd really encourage people to look at the next time they're on family vacation to really pay attention to what these people do if they do end up in a place like that, whether it's like their local museum or you know, or a Yellowstone way out in Wyoming or wherever it is, but really pay attention to the way that the interpreters facilitate your learning as opposed to just tell you what to do. Because what you'll see is that, you know, they're going through the motions, especially if you're familiar with PBL. They have a lot of tips and tricks and little ways of doing things that you can steal and bring right back into the classroom with you. And so, and they also have a lot of resources on how to naturally create this interest and this wonder. They're very good at it, and it's a great kind of method to adopt. Another thing I would also do is suggest that while you're there, or even if you don't happen to be there, find out what resources you have in your community. I just recently moved from California to Minnesota, and so I'm relearning about my community and learning about the different things that are around us. And just so happened to, on my way home from work one day, find out that the local National Wildlife Refuge has this amazing educational resource section, and on all sorts of topics, not just related to science, but math when talking about counting birds, or you know, history when talking about the you know, development patterns and how that affects wildlife. And there's all of these different things that they just have that I just was able to walk in and get because I asked for it and knew about them there. And so I think those are the two kind of tips that I would have for people if they're, I mean, especially if you're looking for outside experts, or if you're looking for people to come and watch your kids present to give them an authentic audience, or just come up with some sort of idea for a project that's authentic. Definitely look at the resources you have around you in the form of parks and recreation, because there's a lot there.
Yeah. And I think, you know, I think the point you made earlier about how close we are to not only national parks, but state and local parks, that's inspiring for me. And I know it will be inspiring for other educators to really just jump out there and see what is available and how we can tie this into presently any projects we have going on or projects we have planned for the future.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
no, absolutely. And I think, especially since, you know, you try to make PBL really one of the hallmarks of it is making the learning relevant for students so that they can actually affect change in their own communities. What better way to do that than to go down to a local community resource or state park and find out what challenges they're dealing with and maybe building a project around it that you can connect with them on. I mean, it would be a great and kind of ready-made formula for some really great authentic learning.
Absolutely. So we're going to round it out. Any specific tips for PBL practitioners or organizational tools that have really helped you?
Yeah, one thing that I always love to offer to the teachers that I'm working with, because a lot of people nowadays, even if not all their students have Google accounts, a lot of teachers do, or you can get one just by signing up for it. And then you get access to all of their great apps. And one question that I have a lot about is managing all the different groups. Like, well, if I have group projects and I have 8 different groups and they're all kind of working at different times at different things, how do I keep them aligned? Google Keep is one of my favorite tools, but you have all of the Google Suite. There are lots and lots of ways to use them as management tools to connect your students with resources, to keep them on track, to collect work from them. And so I always try to get people to do that. And you can find online or even by just talking to the people at your schools, like what they're doing with them, you can get some really great ideas for using the whole Google Suite. And I wrote a couple of blog posts about it too on the BIE website about how great they are and my experiences using them. So I always try to get people to do those. I also really like looking at what other people are doing and by looking at social media, especially the hashtag PBL, because lots and lots of people, they put up great things like resources or different ideas for projects that you can kind of look in and dial in on. And even if you're not a huge social media person per se, you don't have to be to follow the hashtag. You can just do it through an internet browser. And I'd highly suggest people dial into that community of practitioners because they're going to get a lot of great resources from all over the world. So just, yeah, that's kind of the ed tech side of me, kind of offering some solutions on how to bring technology in to make your practice better.
Tip. So if you're not already following the PBL hashtag, please make sure you do on all of your social media networks. Speaking of social media, how can our listeners keep in contact with you, James?
Well, if you're inviting me to shamelessly plug my social media account, we absolutely more than happy to do that. So, so I am on Twitter. I tweet like a maniac. My main account is at Saint Fester, SAINTFESTER, because I was the good son in my family. So that's where that comes from. So that's a great way to connect with me. And if I could also, another way is I have a website, festeredu.com. That's a great place to go. And one thing I'd like to offer up to folks, if they're looking for a place to get started, there's lots of great places to get projects on the internet and great PBL ideas for PBL projects. But if they're looking for some way or looking for examples of how to bring public lands, national parks into the project-based learning process, on my website, or I'm working on a project now called Park-Based Learning, and I'm offering all sorts of free resources for educators that are looking to do that, and also free help for them if they are looking to design their own. And so anybody who's interested, I'd love to have you come and check out the project and lend your support to it. So those are kind of awesome. 3 ways of connecting with me, and always happy to hear from folks.
That's awesome. And if they want to learn more about park-based learning, is there a Twitter handle for park-based learning?
Oh, yeah, there is. Thank you. Yeah, it's Park-Based Learn, because I ran out of characters. So it's Park-Based Learn, all one word. And you can follow along there. I always tweet out a lot of the stuff that either is in the process of being created or is already free and available to educators across the country. So definitely check it out, and love to hear what people think about it as we keep getting going with it.
Awesome. Well, James, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for all of your insight, and I hope that our listeners will connect with you around park-based learning. I surely am going to check the sites. Have a wonderful week.
Yeah, absolutely. You as well. Thank you again for having me on, and really appreciate your time. Great talking to you.
Great talking to you too.
All
Bye
right.
bye.
Bye-bye.